But we begin tonight. We begin tonight with actually something shocking. This is a huge story, and I mean it when I say a story every American needs to know about and be thinking about. It is a story about a secret court, one that is operating inside the United States. It only hears one side of any argument, a secret court that is, honestly, it is rewriting our surveillance laws. It is deciding what we meant as a society, as a country, when we said the government can't indiscriminately spy on us. To understand what this court is doing, though, we need to get into a corner of the lawmaking process, a part of how we really do it, that most in the country just don't think that much about. The way that most of us think about the process of lawmaking is kind of simple. Congress passes a bill, and then the president signs a bill, and maybe he's got a lot of pens when he does it, and he gives the pens away. And then when that is done, when that ceremony comes to a close, that bill is now a law. In President Obama's first term, before all the gridlock paralyzed Washington, this kind of thing, bills becoming laws, happened a lot. Congress passed health reform in 2010 after a big, long, ugly fight. And then President Obama signed health reform into law at a big, fancy signing ceremony. There were a ton of pens that day. And then when it was over, we had Obamacare. Congress passed it, the president signed it, it was done. We had ourselves a brand new law. That is how it works. Frankly, we even have a cartoon about that. You guys remember Lonely Little Bill from the incredibly awesome Schoolhouse Rock series. Lonely Bill made this process, how a bill becomes a law, really familiar to most Americans. But there's something Schoolhouse Rock left out. There is something that happens after the pens are given out and the bill becomes a law, this other thing that happens, which is that people either they don't like the law or they don't understand what it means, or maybe the law is now old and people aren't sure if it applies to some new thing that's come along. And so they take the law to the court. And sometimes it goes to the federal courts, and sometimes it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And after that, the courts look at the law and they say, well, here's what the law means, or what that word means, or here's what it applies to or doesn't apply to, or here's whether it is constitutional or not. And when they say that, when it reaches the highest court it will reach, and they make that decision, that court ruling becomes effectively the law. Whatever that court decides, that is what the law actually means now. It is a law we have to follow. Take Obamacare, the original law that passed Congress, the one President Obama signed with all of those pens. You can see him reaching for them and putting them back down. It said something pretty important. It said states that don't expand their Medicaid programs to accept millions and millions of new low-income individuals, they lose all of the Medicaid money they get from the federal government, all the rest of it too, not just the new Medicaid money, the old Medicaid money, all of it. And no state can afford that, and so they were all going to take the Medicaid money. That provision was challenged in the courts, and the Supreme Court ultimately decided that, well, Obamacare itself is constitutional, and while it may say that you can't have the Medicaid expansion, if you reject it, you lose all your money, they decided that part actually is not constitutional. The court said states do not have to expand their Medicaid programs in order to keep their money. They tweaked the law, and so now a bunch of them aren't expanding their Medicaid programs. So Congress passed a bill, the president signed it into law, and then the court had the ability to redefine the scope of it, to essentially remake the law. But here's the thing, and this is really important. This is how our democracy works. When judges make or change the law, like they did in the case of Obamacare, their rulings are open to the public. Their reasoning is open to the public. Why they did what they did. Both sides of the argument get represented in court. We can listen to those arguments. We know what they said. And since everything is open to the public, Congress can then hear from voters, and then it can go back and rewrite the law. It can make it clear. It can make it conform to the court's interpretation of the Constitution, whatever that may be. The court is not the last word. The public, accountable, democratic, legislative process continues on. That is how lawmaking works. That is how the courts work. That is how it works usually. What we learned this weekend, thanks to extraordinary new reporting, is that one section of our court system has been operating in a completely different way. It's the court that decides how much the federal government is allowed to spy on us. So an important court, the spying court. And it meets in complete secret. This one court that meets in secret has been reinterpreting the laws passed by Congress in a way that gives the government vastly more power to spy on the American people than it had before, than we thought we were giving it when we passed the laws. Today, the Wall Street Journal reported that this court's decision to redefine a single word in the Patriot Act, the word relevant, is the thing, the change, the decision that allowed the government to essentially begin collecting whatever information they wanted on our communications in bulk, just hoovering it up. When Congress passed the Patriot Act, do you remember that? It allowed the government to compel businesses to demand they hand over records and information as long as it could show that those records were, quote, relevant to an authorized investigation. Relevancy was a key. It had to be part of the investigation. So the only way the government could get those kinds of personal records was to go to court and prove they needed them. Prove they needed them because they related to the case that they were working on. That is what Congress wrote into the law, what the American people thought got signed with all those little pens. This court, however, this spying court decided in secret that the word relevant didn't mean like relevant to the thing they were doing. It just meant kind of everything. Congress didn't mean relevant in the way we normally understand it. They just meant, sure, collect whatever information you want because it could become relevant someday. They redefined a word in a law passed by Congress and thereby authorized the federal government to just hoover up phone records indiscriminately. And we didn't know about that until now. And look, it'd be one thing if this were a normal court, if this were John Roberts and Antonin Scalia and Elena Kagan and Clarence Thomas and all the rest of the gang remaking these laws in public, where we can hear what they're saying or read their opinions, and then Congress, after hearing from voters, could react legislatively to the rulings, could say, yeah, that is what we meant by relevant, or no, it's not. This is what we meant by relevant. But that's not how it's happening. This is happening in secret. Laws passed by Congress are being rewritten by the secret court without any sort of public comment or public review. Over the weekend, the New York Times reported on more than a dozen classified rulings from this court that have created essentially a secret body of law totally removed from public scrutiny. The Times says that this court, quote, has quietly become almost a parallel Supreme Court. That, I think, is a scary quote enough. A parallel Supreme Court out of view. But the way this court operates it's amazing. I honestly don't think you're going to believe it. It is unlike any other court in the country. It would give the Schoolhouse Rock guys a run for their money if they're still trying to make adorable explanational videos about this sort of thing. The 11 judges that serve on this court, who are chosen from throughout the federal bench for 7-year terms, they're all appointed. They're all chosen and appointed, selected by one person, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Every single one of these 11 judges right now, serving on this court right now, on the spying court, this very powerful court, every one of them chosen and appointed by Chief Justice John Roberts. And John Roberts alone gets to continue making those appointments until he either retires or dies. And those are really his appointments alone. Those judges don't need to be confirmed by the Senate. They don't need to be approved by a majority of the Supreme Court. It is simply John Roberts. Who do you think would do a good job here? And as you might expect from John Roberts, out of the 11 judges currently serving on the court, 10 of them were appointed by Republican presidents. Only one of them was appointed by a Democrat. So these 11 judges, all chosen by Roberts, 10 of which are Republicans, they meet in secret at this federal courthouse in Washington. The presiding judge only hears the government's argument before issuing a decision. There's no representative of the people or the other side, no one even tasked with making the argument of the other side, which, by the way, is how it is core to how every other court works. You have to hear both sides. And then the decision that this judge, this John Roberts appointed judge, who's only heard one side, makes, it can't be appealed by the public. It can't even be seen by the public or criticized by the public because the public doesn't even know it happened. They can't read the rulings, they're not informed of them, nothing. No other part of U.S. law works this way. No other part of the court system works this way. After Congress passes a law and the president signs it, it is this secret court that has the ability to go back and reinterpret what they meant without the public and often without most members of Congress even knowing what they're doing. This is big news. And thanks to this dogged reporting, we know that the court is doing something we did not know they were doing before. They're not just telling the federal government, yes, what you want to do is in accordance with the law, or no, it is not. It's not just mother may I. This court is reinterpreting the law. They're making law. None of us can see it. None of us can comment on it, but it affects all of us in a really direct way. Now that we know this is happening, a sort of odd bedfellow coalition in the Senate, including Democrat Jeff Merkley and Republican Mike Lee, are pushing to declassify these rulings so we can at least know more about what the court is deciding. According to my colleague Greg Sargent at The Washington Post, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York is now also lending his support to the proposal, and the top Democrat in the House, Nancy Pelosi, says she supports a similar piece of legislation over in her chamber. So that's something. That would be better. It would at least let us know what this court is doing. But is this really the way it should work, this secret court thing? Is this really the way we want to run our democracy? Joining us now is Liza Goitein, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at NYU Law School Center. Brennan Center for Justice. Liza, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So right now, when the government goes before this court, they have an incredible win record. I mean, it is the tiniest fraction of the thousands of cases they bring before them that are rejected. That's even before you get into sort of rewriting the laws. What do we take from that? Because the thing that I keep hearing is that this kind of court, structured the way it is very, it's possible that it's getting captured. They're only hearing from the government and they're being too soft. So what can we take from this incredible win record?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a flawed institution by design, by concept, because it operates in secret, because it only hears from one party, as you said, always the same party, always just the government, because all of the judges are appointed by one person. It's very difficult to see how a court like that could avoid capture. And if you look at the win record that you were talking about, we're talking about somewhere about 34,000 applications since 1978, of which only 11 were denied. And that's one of those numbers where if you type it into your computer to get the percentage, you get, your decimals way out on the side, and you can't even, it's something like 0.03% were denied. So it really is an incredible win record. And I think it's very important to understand that the adversarial process in our court system is not a matter of giving some sort of procedural handicap to whichever party happens not to be the government. Mm-hmm. It is the best way that any legal system has found for getting to the truth. And when you only have one party showing up, you're just more likely to get the wrong answer.
Right. And now one thing that I want to separate out here is we knew beforehand, we knew a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that these courts were getting these 20,000, 30,000 applications and accepting almost all of them. Sometimes they modify the application a bit, but accepting almost all of them. What I'm not sure we knew as well, at least we weren't sure about, was that they were reinterpreting the Patriot Act in very important ways, that they had come up with new classifications, like deciding that your metadata, who you were calling and how long you were calling and who you were emailing, wasn't the same thing as your communications. How new is this actually? How much did we kind of sort of know this was going on, and how much is this something of a shock to the system to learn this court is engaging in sort of high-level reinterpretation like that? Sure.
Well, we certainly knew that metadata is not generally thought of as in the same way that communications are thought of legally, that they don't have the same protections under the Fourth Amendment. But there was still a statute, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, that said that the government could not get that kind of metadata unless it came in and showed that it was relevant to an authorized foreign intelligence or international terrorism investigation. And I don't think anyone would have predicted that the court would look at all Americans' metadata for all telephone calls that Americans make and would somehow come to the conclusion that all of this data could be relevant to a specific authorized investigation. I think, you can predict that the court is going to lean in the government's direction for all the factors that we discussed before. But this is an extreme interpretation that I think has taken a lot of people by surprise.
Liza Goitein, thank you so much for being here tonight. It is honestly kind of a shocking issue.
Thank you.